All right, good afternoon. Yes, it's 3 o'clock. Last session of the day. Did I scare some people? Right on. Okay. So 3 o'clock, last session of PDC. I'm excited to be here. We've got people that are excited to be here. You're clearly excited to be here. Right on. All right, so congratulations on a great PDC, everybody. Hopefully it's been informative for you. I'm hoping that we can close out here with some interesting stuff. We're going to talk about some pretty fun stuff, I think, at the end of the day. Assuming that this one goes. There we go. So xRM. xRM is an interesting topic, obviously something that I feel pretty passionate about. But xRM and Windows Azure start to form a pretty potent combination. So what we wanted to do today was really try and start to illustrate that for you in some pretty tangible ways. So just for introductions, my name is Andrew Bybee. I'm actually a principal program manager with the Dynamic CRM development team. And we're going to actually be walking through a couple of things today. First of all, I want to be able to talk to you about how Windows Azure can really be incorporated as a component of the xRM solutions that you're building, both today and going forward as we look at future releases of the xRM application framework and the CRM product. Secondly, we are actually going to spend some time today, for the first time really ever, publicly in a sense, to walk through some of the new xRM capabilities of Dynamic CRM 5. So xRM is really the application platform underneath the Dynamic CRM product. And so we're going to be talking through in a sort of a more full basis what some of those capabilities are. But we are going to focus more on the development platform and capabilities, not necessarily the entire product. We'll talk about that more later. And then finally, hopefully you'll get the sense that really your ability to rapidly develop and deliver cloud-based business applications really starts to come to fruition with the abilities in the xRM application framework and Windows Azure. So with that, let's just take a step for a second and let's level set on what we're really talking about with business solutions. So you saw maybe earlier in the session at 12:45 that Nikhil did about this notion of a recruiting solution and the fact that your solution is actually made up of a lot of components. It's not just a simple forms over data experience. It's a place to run it. It's a data model. It's a place to experience that, so from an application perspective. It's the ability to extend that and sort of be able to go beyond the basic capabilities of the existing framework with your own logic. And then it's about being able to really go beyond just your own deployment and bring in other components, whether it's integration with line of business applications, or really being able to extend your experience out to customers and people outside of your own organization. And then finally, what's really interesting here is that because we're talking about business process in a lot of cases, we're talking about bringing in the human interaction element into business process. And whether that's about being able to help people with tracking phone calls and appointments, but bringing that into the application and being able to drive a better process overall. So clearly, the best and fastest way for you to try and really drive this is using the Microsoft technologies that you know and love, SQL, .NET, ASP, et cetera. But really the way to think about xRM and Windows Azure to an extent are really about layers that layer on top of this and really build on the knowledge that you have with here to accelerate the work that you're doing. So when we look at xRM and we look at Azure, it's really about extending and giving you a fast way to move out to those places. Now quickly, what is the xRM application framework? The framework is really about driving declarative development of relational business apps using models and services. And this is an important distinction here because model-driven development is something you've heard a lot about with Entity Framework. And services are something that you see a lot of both within SharePoint, within xRM, and other services that you see coming up like with App Fabric. So it's about being able to take those models and really work with models across a variety of domains, whether that's data, things like entities, attributes, relationships, into presentation like forms and views, workflow, having a declarative security model. You may have seen the session that Kim Cameron did on Tuesday regards to the identity roadmap and the power of claims authentication to really drive a sort of new level of abstraction around security. We fundamentally believe in that model, and that's something that with that xRM application framework, you take the advantage of those capabilities. And then on top of that, you're able to then power that with a set of business application services like a multi-tenant controller, the ability to have a robust set of web services. And we'll talk more about some of the interesting new things that are coming in the xRM space around web services, and the ability to scale that very rapidly to an enterprise scale type of a deployment. So this is something that, again, if you're starting from a simple forms over data experience, the ability for you to quickly scale up to a very rapidly expanding application is something that you can now do very quickly with the xRM application framework and with Windows Azure. And what's most powerful about this is that this is a model that doesn't just work in on-premises. This is a model that actually gives you the ability to bring your applications across different deployment models, whether it's you're running on the customer site, a partner, or in the cloud with Microsoft Dynamics CRM Online and Windows Azure. So with that, what we wanted to do today is just to give you a quick overview on some of the investments for xRM in the CRM5 product. So today, xRM is the platform that's really powering Microsoft Dynamics CRM. And what we're looking at in looking forward to CRM5 is really focusing on 3 key areas. The first one of those is around developer productivity. And it's really trying to be in line with a lot of the other productivity improvements that you've seen across the rest of the conference over the last couple of days. So one of the big things here is that you will see us supporting .NET 4 right out of the box with the product. We're very excited about that, and I think as you've seen with some of the other improvements that are coming with .NET 4, I think you'll share our excitement that this is going to be a major step forward in terms of productivity and performance across the board. The second piece that I'll talk about briefly here is really about trying to improve the core developer scenarios that we have in the product. So that includes the ability to take our existing web services, for example, and really bring them forward into modern styles like WCF, REST, and AJAX support. So this is about opening up our traditionally rich set of web services that you might see in the product today and really being able to expand that to a much broader set of audiences and do that in a way that supports both the web service native consumption as well as the introduction of a new client-side object model. So what you'll start to see is you'll start to see a convergence of patterns here between what you would get in the core entity framework, what you would see in SharePoint as a development environment, and what you would see in the xRM application framework as a development environment, is really this convergence around things like link and entity-based programming. So I talked last year at PDC about the power of entity framework and the power of the entity model and data model in general, and hopefully this year you're starting to see that in evidence and in action. The last piece that I'll talk about on the developer productivity side is really the notion that because people are making investments in the xRM application framework today, as it's realized in the CRM 4.0 product, we're also keeping cross-version compatibility. So in the next release of the product, you'll actually see us support the existing v4 web services and the new v5 web services together. So you'll be able to write code and have that code move forward very seamlessly to your v5 deployment, and we'll show you an example of that in just a few minutes. Moving on to the next sort of bucket here, really in terms of the power of choice message that you'll hear from us quite a bit, we have a lot of work that's happening. Some of the most exciting stuff is actually things that we've talked about previously, so I won't spend a lot of time on them today. For example, last year we showed you some early previews of being able to actually sandbox code and run that in the Microsoft Online environment. But this also extends then to being able to bring in Windows Azure and the Service Bus components into the environment. And the ability to now support claims-based authentication and integrate with portals out of the box. So we'll show you some of these things in just a few minutes in a very exciting way. And then finally, in terms of our rich platform services, there are a variety of investments that we're making at this layer to really try and make your solutions much more robust. One of the major capabilities that we're introducing in CRM5 is this notion of solutions management. And this is an application management framework in the product and in the application framework. And I talked more about that on Tuesday, so I would encourage you to go back and look at that session so you can see more information on the work that we're doing there. And there are some other things that we're doing in terms of data modeling and transactions and auditing. And again, I won't spend a lot of time talking about those today, but the core takeaway really from this particular section is to understand that we're moving the story forward, both in terms of the types and the depth of the models that we're supporting in the framework, as well as the services and the depth of those services that you have to bring to bear for your solution. Now, what's really interesting about this then is that we want to spend some time drilling in with you in more detail about what these actually look like. And so to help me out, I'm going to introduce a partner of ours, Shan MacArthur. Shan MacArthur is with ADX Studio. And ADX Studio is a partner that we've been working with. They have a similarly deep appeal towards developer productivity and really trying to make that experience great. And so we've been working with them through the CRM5 process to make sure that we can actually bring some of these great capabilities to bear for CRM5. So with that, let's bring on Shan and we'll walk through some of the stuff.
Thank you, Andy. Can you hear me back there?
Yep.
There, thank you. Thanks, Andy. I'm on C?
Yeah.
I'm going to start off just a little background for everyone up here. This is the xRM 5. I'm going to be customizing the system here as a data background here. I want to show you what you can do in xRM from an entity modeling standpoint, and then take that down to code. So I'm going to be talking a lot from a developer productivity perspective today. So this is very similar to xRM 4 as far as you've got entities and you've got attributes. And entities, for those of you that aren't familiar with xRM, if you're more familiar with SQL, entities are like tables, and attributes or fields are much like columns on a table. And xRM has a very rich interface for relating different types of entities with each other. So if I go to one of my custom things that I did here is an asset here. So I can open up the asset. And it's an entity, so I've got both a singular and a plural name. And I can define quite a number of different things in xRM. You'll notice there's quite a few new ones in here, and we're not going to really go into the details on that. But bottom line is it's a rich entity, so it's not just a table. There's a lot of other information in here that the xRM lights up with that. So you define your entity, and then you define attributes. And quite a few of these attributes will come out of the box with your entity. You can also then define your own attributes on top of it. So in this case here, the category is a pick list. So I've done a pick list, and I've defined a number of these different values for this pick list. So it's a very rich user interface, and it has quite a number of different types of attributes that you can define. So that one was a pick list, and this is a cost. So this one is a money, a currency type of a data type. And you'll notice there's a different user interface. So the xRM is actually pretty good at giving you a usable user interface that's really context sensitive to the types of things that you're doing at the time. I'm not going to go through all my different things. The one thing that I will show, though, is relationships. So much like in SQL, you can have foreign keys, and you can have many-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many relationships. In xRM, you can do that as well. In this one here, I've got a relationship back to the user. So from my asset entity back, called the custodian, back to the user entity. And you'll notice that I can define the name of it and that it's another entity type called user. There also is a lot of information in xRM besides just having that relationship for it. You can define the types of behaviors, and you'll notice we can reparent things and there's a sense of ownership in here and sharing that data.
One of the things that's also interesting about this that not as many people may be aware of, but this is really a perfect example of that models plus services story, that ability for you to define the information about the relationship, not just as a simple foreign key, but the ability to now drive that through different types of operations like assign, share, cascade, reparent. That really is the perfect story of how those services and the model supporting those relationships work together to actually simplify something that you would spend a lot of time on as a business application developer trying to think through some of those types of operations.
So in addition to defining your basic entities and relationships and attributes, you also go in and define your forms and views. So really you're defining the UI. And I'm not going to show that because that's not really the developer story I want to show. But the bottom line is you really can define a lot about your business right up here in the designer. And then you publish this to your CRM, and this becomes a deployment. So where does the developer story come in here? So the developer story is with CRM 5, it's a WCF interface. So in CRM 4, for those of you who are aware, they had SOAP endpoints. So you can hook up to it with any kind of a distributed system, any kind of system on any platform using the SOAP platform or the SOAP standards. In CRM 5, they've upgraded that to WCF. So you still get the multi-tiered support, but you also get a much cleaner and easier to develop or use and consume WCF service, as well as there's lots of investments with the rest of the cloud, which we're going to show a little later into here, which really come through. So in the developer world, to be really productive as developers, where we're going is if you take a parallel into sort of like Entity Framework, Astoria, or ADO.NET RIA services, or sorry, ADO.NET Data Services and .NET RIA services. Really, developers are going down a way where we have a domain model, and we're dealing with objects in memory. And we have code gen that's behind the scenes. And some different ones are completely embedded in the GUI, and other ones are still in command line. So I'm going to show you a command line version that we have now. We call the tool CRM Metal, mainly because it started from following the naming conventions from SQL Metal, from when SQL was started to have LINQ. So I'm going to run a utility. Actually, I ran a utility previously, and I'm going to give it. I gave it a namespace name and a data context name, and I told it to include some additional information. That tool then generated a class here, or basically a project. And I put all these files into one project. There are two things in that thing that are being generated. The first thing is a data context. So if I go to my program here, this data context here is sort of like a connection, or in any framework way, you'd be a connection to SQL. In this way, it's a connection to CRM. And you'll notice that connecting to CRM here, I've got a connection string. So much like we do with SQL, you manage your connection strings to your SQL Server by putting them in your config file. So we figured that why don't we parallel all that within CRM as well? So you have a SQL or a CRM connection string right within the connection strings. And for the people that are more security conscious, you can encrypt this whole section, and you get some pretty secure configurations as well. And it makes it also easier to fit into the similar deployment story of future versions of .NET and Visual Studio. So you can do the dev, test, and prod deployment and have all these connection strings all straighten themselves out. So if I go back to my code here, I'm actually going to start debugging this code. Probably easier for me to show you the code in action. So I'm going to new up the data context. And the job of the data context is to really, there's a couple of things. It brings off all of the service operations for CRM into one service handle, as well as it gives you iQueryable interfaces. And I'll go into that in a minute here, but basically you can write link queries right against that. Those service operations that are implemented in there are all the standard CRUD and relationship type of things that you would do with the CRM, and it follows the patterns that are set inside the ADO.NET Data Services stuff. So it really fits well with the rich text, the rich internet application development platforms and modern web stuff, which I'll show you in a minute.
And one of the things to note here is that with CRM5, one of the things that we're doing is really introducing some new types where you can now use system types instead of CRM-specific types for a lot of the things that you'd normally set. So, and again, this is about just trying to simplify that story about being able to now set and really use the service.
So this, the second thing that the tool generates is what we call DTOs, or data transfer objects. So basically, there's objects for every entity in your CRM today. So we went through and we found a contact entity, so it's actually in that project. We now have a contact. We can new up a new contact and set with those .NET data types. So they're actual strings, they're actual Booleans, they're actual date times. Those things are important from a .NET developer's perspective. In SOAP, it was required to wrap them in objects in order to be serialized across platforms. But in .NET, with the rich client proxying generation that we can do, we're trying to bring this right down to what .NET developers expect. So in here, it's pretty simple. You create a new contact, you set the first name, last name, and email. We follow the pattern that's out there, so add to contacts and put contact in there, and then save changes. At this point in time, it'll actually persist it to the CRM. So at this point in time, it's actually going out, and this is going against CRM5, so it actually went really fast. When I show you the example against CRM4, you'll see an extra delay in there, and that's one of the benefits of doing WCF and their new patterns is they've really went down for really high efficiency web services. So in addition, we've got this contact out there that is actually now in the CRM. We're going to create an account or a company, and we're going to set the account name to Peanuts. And also here, we're going to set the primary contact. So there's a many-to-one relationship between account and contact. So instead of trying to get the IDs and GUIDs and parse all that stuff out and set the two between attributes, we're making it convenient. You can actually set an object reference straight up. So this one actually put that in there. Create a marketing list. I'm using this one because there's a many-to-many relationship between marketing list and contacts. So here, we're creating a marketing list, calling a softball team, and it's of type contact.
And here what you're seeing is the ability now with some of the client-side proxies here to be able to now get to information that typically you had to do more operations for in terms of relationships and going through relationships, and now you can get to that very quickly through the proxies that are being built.
And following that same theme, actually, this add link here is the way to reference or link two different entities on all types of relationships, whether it's many-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many. So here, to add a contact to a marketing list, it's one line of code. So we're taking the list and contact and associating them and saving changes. So that's already done. It's now that data is in the CRM. Second part of that, so that's some basic CRUD. It's actually very convenient. Where really the power comes in is with the link and the iQueryable. So what we've got here is the contact. So we've got a record here, the contact that I created earlier. Part of that code gen actually gives you iQueryable interfaces, or interfaces you can write queries or use in your code natively on all the relationships. So it's determined in the CRM metadata that there's a relationship between contact and marketing list. So we can actually now walk through, all the marketing list for this contact. And you'll also notice when we get into here that the list, we can have strong type names on everything, and the full IntelliSense help comes through, and you don't have to double click all the way through to drill into the actual value. So it's fairly productive for a developer to use. Also, if this is the data context back here, the data context is generated with an iQueryable interface again on top of all of the entities. So basically now I can use this to go through and write unique link expressions that aren't actually anchored within a particular object. So here, this would just go through all the contacts in the system. You can also write link sort of expressions on here too. So I'm going through CRM contacts. First or default means find me one, or if you can't find me anything, give me null, where the contact's email address is charliebrown@peanuts.com. So it's really easy to write one line of code that does a fairly complex a query against the CRM and comes back within one line of code. And the other thing is, it's very easy to understand. You can see that this is looking and querying for a contact where the email is equal to peanuts.
Now, what's interesting about the work that we're doing is that it's really about being able to layer on top of the query expression support. So we still have full support for query expression and for fetch XML for those of you that are familiar with the query interop today. But this is really about layering additional types of query capabilities on top of that so that you can really continue to support the existing ones if you want to, or you can start to take advantage of the integrated query model.
And underneath, this all goes across the standard CRM SDK, in this case, WCF services right across the wire. So I'll just skip through this one. This one is going to look for all contacts where the email ends with .peanuts, so there'd be multiple contacts in there. There probably is only one in my data set here, but, oh, there was two. We can also do complex joins. So we're going to join select from contacts. We're going to join through accounts, where the contact, the parent customer account is equal to the account ID. And we're going to put a where clause, so where the parent customer account name is equal to peanuts. And we can go through that as well. And many-to-many joins is stepped a little further there. We can also support many-to-many joins through that linked entity in the middle as well. So it's just a matter of putting joins in there. So this one was looking for all the contacts in the marketing list with the name of softball, so, which would be the one we just created. So it's pretty straightforward. Oops, wrong code. Pretty straightforward application. It's very easy to use. Now, the really cool thing here, and I want to show you what Andy was mentioning before, is I've got a little tool here called V4, which basically just copies my project file. So I've got new references. So in order to switch between CRM 5 and CRM 4, I really just changed my project references. So I just had already done the project reference, so I just set them in there. And bottom line is you take out the CRM 4 references and you put in the CRM 5 references. And we code-gen I pre-code-gen the entity mapping as well. So, and that's included in the project references. So the only change I need to make in code is, because I've got two connection strings, I need to change the one to the other connection string. So I'm going to build this application. I'm going to run it. Oops, there's 3 errors. I shouldn't have had an error.
So the basic story here, while Shannon's looking at that, is really about being able to say that once you start building with the client-side object model, you'll actually be able to then maintain your code even across versions, because the web services are obviously abstracted by the client-side proxy.
Don't know why it built, or it didn't have a build problem that time.
There you go.
Must have been my X copy. So this is going to run, and now it's a little different here. So this is against CRM4. You can see my CPU is actually going pretty high. What's happening here is it's using the SOAP services, and it has to get the serialization proxies. And because it's a very large service, there's a lot of proxies and some local compile to do. But the bottom line is it still runs. So the cool thing is you can write code today and actually cross-compile and make it run in CRM5 with no change in your code. And just a quick little difference on the reverse compatibility. There's actually 2 reverse compatibility stories. The story that I'm saying here is you can write to this data context type of methodology and actually recompile your code against CRM5, and it'll run without changes, and you're actually using the new WCF services on 5, and today would you be able to use the SOAP services on 4. The other one is the work that you guys are doing for reverse compatibility of including your old CRM4 endpoints in CRM5. So all of the code that's written and still already compiled against CRM4 will still work against CRM5 using those interfaces. But you're going to be limited to the functionality that was there, but that's the reverse compatibility story.
So that's pretty cool, but I don't know a lot of people that write console apps and sell them. So we can do something a little bit cooler than that, though, right?
Let's do that. I'm just going to hit the debug go here. Actually, I should recompile it. Debug start. It helps not to debug this one. Why is this not going? Build. There we go. So this is a web application. So in addition to console apps, we got full support of WPF applications, Silverlight applications, and web applications. We can have web forms examples in here. This is going to go pull a web form, and the code for that is simple as dropping in the Microsoft Link Data Source Control. Let me just spin that site up there. So you drop in the Link Data Source Control, which is the Microsoft control, get in your data context, and tell it, so there's your data context there, and tell it what you're going to be querying, so assets, and then you use standard ASP.NET data binding with no code behind. So it's an impressive thing for those of you that are used to coding applications against CRM now. But that's not really where it's really interesting. That's just ASP.NET old stuff. So here's what's the new stuff. So ADO.NET Data Services is query by REST, or query by URI. It's a REST feed on top of a data model. And the REST feed in Astoria actually works quite well against a generated domain context. So we've generated our data context here to specifically work natively within the ADO.NET Data Services. So you new up an ADO.NET Data Service, you give it your context name, set your security rules in here, and of course from a demo, I'm just wildcard, let everything open, but you wouldn't do that, would you? But anyways, that's the only wiring that you need to have the ADO.NET Data Service going. So what can you do with that? So you can just query it, so you can see that the service URL is there. When you query the URL, it tells you what it's doing. You can actually go through and let's pull contacts where the last name is equal to Charlie Brown, or last name is equal to Brown. So you can actually write queries by URI. And that's not useful seeing, or very interesting seeing XML coming across the screen, but where do you use that? In Ajax, this application here used that. So if I take a look at this, first of all, you'll notice it's an HTML page. That's not a dynamic page. That's a static page on the server. If we do a view source on this one, you'll see that we actually are connecting to the CRM service that I was just showing you, that service there, and we're using standard data binding. So we're binding the name, the serial number, the category label, and the custodian full name. So it's very easy to build rich applications in Ajax. Same thing we said for Astoria. With Silverlight. So this is a Silverlight application, again, using that ADO.NET Data Service feed. And now you get even a richer interface. It's got nice hovering and all that kind of stuff that you would expect out of a Silverlight app. So the next generation stuff, so all this stuff is in production today, with the exception of the CRM, but all of the technologies that I'm showing on there, I think the Ajax might be a little bit a beta as well. But the next one here is called .NET RIA Services. And .NET RIA Services is the ability to not only just generate your domain model, but also give it the hints, like the display names and the data types and the requirement fields and how long of a string is allowed and what the ranges are of a value. So those things get generated as well. Well, our CRM Metal can generate that context as well.
Now, what's interesting here is for those of you that watched the keynote on Wednesday, you saw a demonstration of the new Silverlight 4 capabilities in building business apps, and that ability to basically have markup in your Silverlight code that allowed you to provide some constraints. Now, what's interesting here is that because of the model that you have with CRM, you're able to actually take those models, and when you build those controls, incorporate those same metadata concepts from CRM and transform them into the Silverlight concepts and have them be honored and respected. So now what you're able to do is define the model in CRM and as part of the xRM application framework and have that bring through all the way down to the Silverlight experience in a very integrated and inbuilt way.
So in this case, I'm going to drop two domain sources. One is for assets, one is for users. And I'm going to put a standard data grid on here. And again, we're going to use standard Silverlight data binding on here with very little code behind. The only code behind on here for this page here is the stuff that I'm using for the update panel to show me what it is. And I'm basically calling submit changes on the events. To show you what this user interface is here, I've got a full rich user interface here with a master detail and a detail down here. I can actually go in here and modify this. So it's going to change the serial number here to put some stuff up in front of it here. And you go here and you'll see this. So this actually is now updated in CRM. So the CRM data has actually been changed. And you'll notice I didn't do any code for that. That's one of the values of the .NET RIA services, is it knows what to do with the metadata and knows how to talk to the server. Now I know that there's some constraints on this serial number field in CRM because it was 25 in there. And if I go off this field here, and I'm in debug mode, so I was expecting this. But from your user standpoint, you'll get a UI. I didn't have to generate the UI. That was automatically generated. And look at the error message. The field serial number must be a string with a maximum length of 25. I don't have to write that. All of this stuff can be actually auto-genned, and the .NET RIA services and the Silverlight client know how to handle that. And the real benefit of that is it's validated client-side and validated to the server. So you know from an enterprise standpoint that your data is safe.
Yep. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shan. All right. So what did we just show you? Really, it's about the first part of the story. Developer productivity is about using the capabilities and the enhancements that are coming with the rest of the stack, and being able to build on that is really the foundation. So you say, okay, that's really interesting. But now, really what I want to be able to do then is I want to be able to really understand, how does Azure start to now pull into this? Well, the first part is you're building on .NET. So as the story for Azure supporting .NET is obvious, that allows you to then extend that out with the same exact kind of code. Now, what we wanted to do then is really show you two different types of stories on top of that. So the first one is a little more, it's more demo, it's more exploratory. It's meant to show you some ideas and illustrate some ways that you could use Azure. And we're going to have Girish Raja come up. And then after that, we're going to show you some real-world application of both of these technologies right after that. So with that, what we'll do is we'll have Girish come up, and Girish is going to walk us through a demo we fondly call the phone company. So with that,
Thanks,
let's
Andy.
take it away.
All right. So, and as Andy was saying, CRM is redefining a lot of line of business scenarios, but at the same time, Microsoft is doing a lot of innovation in the cloud to raise the bar so that when you're building business applications, be it a public site or an extranet site running up on the cloud, or be it an on-premises line of business server that is running behind the firewall like a CRM system, you have this complete spectrum of technologies with the Microsoft Web Platform that you can build integrated and rich applications. And today we're going to see a demonstration of that. And remember that Azure is a great platform that allows you to have the scalability and the flexibility in the cloud, but at the same time, CRM provides a sort of rich functionality to build your business applications and provide the first-class end-user experience so that your users can do their job better. So with that, I'm going to switch over to the demo machine here. That's the right one. Yep, there we go. So for this demo, I'm going to play the role of a consumer of this phone company. So what I have is I have a mobile phone that doesn't work. So that means I cannot tweet, I cannot SMS, and at least but not, I cannot make calls, which is a big deal. So what I'm going to do is, at a place like this at PDC, I have internet access. So what I'm going to go is, I'm going to go to the site and fill out a service request. So in this case, notice this is a website that is running on Windows Azure. So the cloudapp.net clearly shows you that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to sign into this website. And what it's going to do in a second is it's going to ask me for my username and password. In this case, I'm going to enter some test credentials. And as I'm signing in, what it's doing right now is it's using a custom membership provider against my CRM data, and it's going to log me in. So in this case, I'm getting validated against a contact record. But as Andy was saying in camera session, CRM5 now supports federated identity with the Windows Identity Framework. So what I can do now is I can either go authenticate against a contact record, or I can authenticate against a system user, giving the user anywhere access to the data that they need.
Absolutely.
So in this case, real simple. I'm logged in. I'm looking at my name, phone number, email address, and all of that. But the neat thing here is that this Windows Azure website in the cloud gets all of this data from a VPC running on this machine right here. And I'm obviously behind a firewall, and I'm not able to open up ports or anything like that. But in this case, what we're using here is the App Fabric service bus. So what the App Fabric service bus allows me is to open up a connection behind the firewall, be it in your data center, or be it in your office, or be it under your desk. You can open up a port and have a connection open to public websites that can go talk and get this data. And think about this in a public sector scenario where you have so much restrictions, or even in an enterprise where you have to wait for months to get a port open or to get your application outside of your firewall. This solves a lot of that problem. And it's not just about retrieving data here. What I'm going to do now is actually go ahead and submit my service case here.
Yeah, my phone's still broken.
OK, so what do we have here? We have a form to fill out my service case, and we have a little map that asks me to point out where exactly I don't have my service. So in this case, I don't know if you noticed, but the experience was real smooth because I was using Bing Maps for Silverlight. Woohoo for Bing Maps. So with the Silverlight experience, what I can do is I get this smooth zooming, panning experience with this map. So notice how far I am zoomed out, and I'm going to switch to aerial view to make this even better. And with a few flicks, I can readily zoom in to where we are. If I can get my mouse going here. So that is the Los Angeles Convention Center right there, and the Staples Center. So I'm going to say at 502, that's exactly where I'm not having service. At 502A, and then I'm going to submit this case. Again, another interesting pattern here is that it's going to take this data about the service case. It's going to take the latitude and longitude coordinates of this map right here, and it's going to fold this data into a queue. It's Murphy's Law, so all that begins well should end well. Let's do a refresh on this, see where we get. Launch support here. Put it over there. Maybe it doesn't like it. Let's see what we have. I want to quickly restart the service here for 1 second. Maybe it was sleeping for too long.
Real service, real code.
Real cloud.
Yeah.
Real cloud.
Maybe I should be reporting a problem about the connection here, not
There you
about my
go.
phone service. So refresh this page. Bum, bum, bum. Well, anyways, what it's going to do right now is it's going to take the service case and it's going to put into a Windows Azure queue. And the reason that we are putting it into a Windows Azure queue is because Windows Azure queue provides the scalable storage where when you have a real outage like this, you're going to have a lot of people coming in and filling in service requests. So it's not just 10 people or a few hundred people. You could have thousands of people or even millions of people trying to enter data into your system. Make sure I can get this one more time. If not, that's OK. Let's not worry about it. But what we also want to show is that the real pattern here is that once I create a service case, it's not going to directly enter it into my CRM system. It's going to put it in the queue, and then I have a worker role that's going to pop it out of the queue, and then through the service bus, send it over to my CRM system. And this pattern scales, because when I have 1 million records, I cannot tolerate my CRM system with 1 million records in a matter of moments. But Windows Azure can store all of these records, slowly buffer them through into my CRM system, or if my CRM system is getting overloaded, all I have to do is stop the listener that I have right here, and then every data is going to be queued in Windows Azure, and I can pull it out whenever I want. And I knew something like this would happen, so what I'm going to do is don't look over here, and I'm going to change my snapshot here on the Hyper-V machine. So let's look at the scenario if that had worked. We had so many people coming in and so many people filling in service requests. And then we have the virtual machine starting. So the pattern really here is that you have business applications that you're building that have several components. There are components in the cloud that have lots of information, and you have components in the line of business application that is specific to your business and specific to the data model that you need. And in this case, Azure provides the scalable storage, but CRM provides a fantastic way to map all of the data into this model here. So let's look at full screen here. And hit F11 so that you can see the whole screen here. So imagine if you had a lot of requests, let's say a mayhem of requests, a lot of cases came in. And by the way, we'll figure it out what the problem is. We shot a Channel 9 video this morning that had the demo working. Yeah. So fingers crossed, demo gods, let's be.
But just to recap on that, so the basic model here is you're running a phone company. You have things that you know about, things that you don't know about, and the question is how do you actually deal with both of those? So
exactly.
The ability to use queues was a way to try and help make sure that any incoming requests that you may not know about immediately are going to still not overwhelm the back-end systems.
Absolutely.
And then now that you've got those back-end systems, you've got a bunch of information here in the system. Now, how are you going to start to manage this inside as the back-end service rep?
Sure. So I'm going to play the role, as Andy says, as a service rep. I'm trying to get, make a sense out of all of this information right here. So as you can see, I have a large number of service cases. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my dashboards area. And in this case, what we're looking at is a native CRM5 dashboard. This is not using a separate product. I don't need any dependence here. But this is a native dashboard that is showing me an overview of everything that is happening around in my service request area. So what I have here is I have a native visualizations, which is part of CRM5. This is something that I can build without writing a single line of code. And I have a few Silverlight controls that are pulling the same sort of information from a different perspective. And with the Silverlight, I get like dynamic updates and a richer set of functionality. And with this native dashboard, I can mix them and match all of these together so that I can have a rich experience that my user is going to need.
So the big difference here is really that in V4, you had the ability to point to existing web resources. But now in V5, we're actually adding the ability for you to host those resources directly on the CRM server with symmetry between on-premises and in the cloud. So you now have the ability, even in CRM Online, to be able to now host these resources and reference them directly.
Exactly, so that's a good point. So these Silverlight controls, I can have HTML pages or JavaScript pages uploaded as a web resource to my system, and it's part of my solution. It's part of my customizations. I can import them or export them in one shot, and they'll be with the system together. And also same thing with the visualizations. And visualizations, it gives me further flexibility where I can drill in, say, for example, at the 102 cases, if I want to drill in by like request type and I want to view that as a pie chart, I can do this right here. And it's going to dynamically update and show me the updated graph. And I can go back or I can go home or drill down or roll up to as much level as I want.
Yep. Now, one thing to think about here with the visualizations work is it's really targeted towards giving you that first level of analysis on the data. Now, clearly, there's a lot more analysis that you can do when you start getting into analysis services, when you start talking about the power of SharePoint and Performance Point, and being able to bring those dashboards in as well. And we really see this as complementary to that story. So we fully expect that as you're building out your solutions, you'll identify a range of analytics and charts that you would need, and you'd be able to now incorporate those into the navigation using the known extension paradigm.
Absolutely, and this is a fast start. You can build this in a matter of minutes or hours and then get going. And if you want to scale it out and extend it further, you can absolutely do that with the extensibility options. Another thing that I wanted to show you is, let's go into the service area a little more and notice that, there is a server phone tower, and clearly the problem that you've been having a lot of service requests is because we had a tower that was not functioning properly. So this tower, 73717, I'm going to have to find out what's wrong with this. So in this case, I'm going to go to the service request again. And notice one of the new functionalities in CRM here. Instead of viewing rows and rows of data, I can view those charts and visualizations in line within the grid. So right within the grid, what I can do right now is I can plot a map. In this case, again, a Bing Maps. In this case, we're using an Ajax version just to show the difference here. So I can show this in a Bing map and show here's all the records. Here's how I've plotted these within a map. So if I'm showing at a list of accounts or a list of contacts, I can absolutely do the same thing. So the message here is that I can build these custom web resources and upload them as custom visualizations to my system and attach that to my existing data that I have in my system already. And of course, I can have multiple visualizations. So if I have, I can have a plain vanilla visualization that we showed earlier, but I can also have custom visualization. I can have as many number as I want.
Then, as we mentioned in the solutions packaging discussion on Tuesday, the ability to now take these visualizations and incorporate them as part of your solution definition, and then bring them along across either deployment, test to dev, et cetera, now becomes part of that overall application framework.
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to show you is, let's take a look at the actual tower that was giving us all the problems. In this case, I'm going to open up this tower record. In this case, tower is obviously a custom entity, so have the custom entity form come up. So here's the tower, and I can also notice here's the list of service cases that might be associated with the tower. The neat thing here is I have an entity, and within an entity, I have a subgrid of another entity natively that is connected here. So I didn't have to do any iframe magic or anything like that. I can natively include that as part of my form. And also, the way that we associated here is we ran a geospatial query to figure out, here is my tower, and here is all the cases that might possibly be associated with it. And to explain it more visually, in this case, again, I have Bing Maps and Silverlight that is showing me the location of the tower. So this is this tower right here outside of the Staples Center. So if you walk outside, you should definitely be able to see it. But the case here is, I have a lot of problems that are being reported around this tower. And what I can do is I can quickly click on this and look at the coverage area for this. And instead of having a lot of tiny little requests, What I'm going to do now is I'm going to combine these requests into one single service case. So what's happening here is it's taking all of these individual service cases, and it's going to create a one high-priority consolidated service case. I can say whether I want to consolidate it or not. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and consolidate it. And what it's going to do right now is it's going to kick off a workflow to remove all the priority to service cases from the queue and roll them up under a major high-priority service case. And as part of the workflow, since CRM is running Windows Workflow 4.0 in the version 5, it can do a lot of things like, it can send out a note to a service technician, it can, through the service bus, call out an external party, or it can send an alert to the website saying, we are aware of this problem, we'll fix it as soon as possible. So end to end, let me quickly switch back to the slides and show you what we've been seeing here. So what it is you have a simple browser that was a public website that any customer can come in and enter information. In this case, they were entering service case information. What happened was the web role of Azure put all those cases into this Azure storage right here. And then what happened was as the storage was going up, there is a worker role that was running in parallel. It was dequeuing all of these service cases through the service bus, entering them all to my CRM storage. So this way, I can have my CRM storage anywhere else, or I can have multiple systems that I can send this message to. So I have the complete flexibility with my on-premises application, but at the same time, I have the scalability and flexibility that I would expect in a cloud application.
Awesome.
With that, let me hand it back to Andy.
Thanks, Girish.
Thanks.
All right. So definitely some cool stuff there. Now, what did we also see there? Really, this is about being able to take advantage of the xRM application framework and Windows Azure to actually scale your application very quickly. Now, this is not just about scaling on the back end, where you can now scale with xRM along a number of different dimensions around users, around data, around transactions. And we're seeing some incredible numbers in our development with Dynamics CRM 5. So we're very excited about where we think these numbers are going to be at, even higher than they are in CRM 4. But this is also about taking advantage of this, sort of the cloud bursting concept, where you have scenarios of capacity that you might know about ahead of time, where you can maybe plan for that with increasing the number of instances that you're provisioning in Windows Azure, but then also being able to then use queuing and other technologies to be able to buffer some of that incoming flow, whether that's just a service outage because of a tower or something more malicious like a denial of service request. So what did we just show you then? We showed you something that starts to pull a lot of these technologies together into a more complete end-to-end scenario. And we love that story, and that story is going to continue to get more fleshed out. What I wanted to do now, though, is really start to bring this even more to ground and introduce Jim Steger. Jim Steger is with Sonoma Partners. Now, Sonoma Partners, hey. Sonoma Partners is a good CRM partner of ours, but what's most interesting is that even outside of this whole conversation, they started to look at the technologies and really start to apply it to an interesting challenge that they have all on their own within their organization. So it's interesting not just because of the fact that it's organic and was generated not because of this session, but because of our own business need. But it's actually interesting because everything that we're about to see is actually built off of the Dynamics CRM 4.0 product that's in market today, using the current versions of the xRM application framework. So it's exciting, not just because it's cool, but because it's actually something that you guys can go off and build now. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Thank you, Andy. So Sonoma Partners, we're about a 50-person firm now, and about 20% of my workforce is now remote. So spring, summer timeframe, we started to decide how can we get better collaborative environment and keep our culture that was core in the Chicago office out to all of our disparate users. That, coupled with the kind of the push with socialization, kind of led us to what we called internally as Project Sidebar. So the goals of the project were quite simple. We really wanted to get, again, a cohesive environment that was not email or IM based, that was searchable. And what was core for me is two fronts. One is we wanted to make sure that you had multiple entry points to get this data both in and out of the system so we can encourage adoption. The second is we wanted to make sure it was searchable across these data points. So if we have a support issue and somebody logs a thread on that, and that thread can now be searched across a system. Since we are obviously very close to Dynamics CRM, because that's what we do all day, every day, the xRM platform provided an excellent starting point for us to build this application. And what you're going to see with this application is that we start to plug in other technologies, in this case a WPF application, as you see the screenshot, and we'll give you a demo in a minute, that allows, again, a richer interface for this type of threaded application. The last piece, and this part is, I think, important that it separates us from like a Twitter or a Facebook app, is that we have access to our line of business applications. In our world, it's mostly xRM, coupled with our back-end financials, which is QuickBooks in our case. We can take that data, coupled with our analytics, and feed that data into the system. That does a couple things for us. One, it exposes information out to the organization in an interface that they're encouraged to see, because they can subscribe to feeds. The second thing is it encourages people who may not ordinarily, type a feed or make a comment. They basically get their interaction from the system into the application. So myself, I'm not very social. Maybe I'm not going to be posting things normally. Again, if I'm filling out my data within xRM, or in our case, our CRM system, that data is going to get flushed out and encourage kind of that adoption. And then, of course, the last point is always the most fun. It's got to be meaningful, and if you can make it exciting and fun for people, they're more apt to use it. So with that, I don't know how this stuff works.
F. There you go.
OK. So let's take a look here. I'll go ahead and minimize this. Let's just do this. So we started off, as Andy said, on CRM 4.0. This is all running on CRM 4.0. We're doing a dev instance here, and I'll show you my production one at the end. What we're doing here is a basic feed-based information. So you can easily type statuses, what you're doing, giving demo. And what you'll see here is that it will pop in. What's really cool about this is our first generation of this was basically Atom-based. Once we started figuring out the WCF coupled with, what do we call it now, App Fabric, but what I call the service bus, that's solving a problem that I had in our feature set, which is I want to get this exposed out in multiple places. So when we're on site with a customer, we're not always going to have VPN access due to their own network constraints. So what this application is actually doing right now is talking through the service bus to my server at my office behind the firewall without any connection opened up by my network team. And as you can see, it was actually pretty quick. Since I have one of my colleagues, Matt Weiler, in the office, he's actually updating as well.
Although he's playing WoW, I don't know about that one.
Yeah. What's actually fun as a use case is that we opened up the feeds to be whatever. And I'm seeing a roughly 70%, 30%, of 30% being real business data value, and the other 70% being more what I'd call fun or collaborative. But that's even still, as a business owner, powerful because I got people interacting with each other, and I'm getting my remote users pulled into that same interaction. As you can see here, with simple WPF stuff, I can pick my feeds off. Again, these feeds are coming directly from the CRM data. So this is an entity, as you will see, in Dynamic CRM, and it's pulling here automatically. I can type in a note to him, and this will go directly to Blake. Whoever subscribed to Blake's feed will get this, as well as Blake will get a targeted feed on that. If you search down some of our pieces, now you can start to see some of our derived data. This derived data is coming from native workflows directly out of CRM. Again, no additional lines of code for me. A business analyst can construct it, and in our case, our sales manager was the one who constructed our workflow for orders. You can write comments to it. More importantly, we just tagged this. What was great is that our developers had the concept of taking a pound or a hash name or text field, and they just hyperlinked it. And they just hyperlink it as a shortcut to our search page. So again, I can go into any workflow rule or anything, tag whatever I'd like. And again, it's flexible at the same time, not enforced. And we get a quick search of now all the orders in the system. And this for me was nice because as you start to get, I think we're up to like 6,000 posts, I want a quick way to sort and see the data that I'm interested in. To extend the application to show you that it is a real app, we kind of added a preferences page. All this data writes directly to CRM records. So with that, let's see what that actually means on the CRM side. What's great about the xRM platform for us is this is effectively 4 entities, but really 3 entities and a many-to-many join in between. We have one plugin to kind of help on performance of sorting through all these feeds and targeting them. So basically, we were done in about less than 2 days with the all xRM piece. And that includes creating feeds, workflows, et cetera.
So when you guys were starting this was actually something that you had started as sort of an idea, but then who did you actually put on it from a resourcing perspective?
That's actually a great point. So it's hard to take a consulting firm and do internal work. So we used our intern program. So we actually had 4 individuals from various schools in the Midwest come in, know nothing about Dynamic CRM and very little about Microsoft programming. And within a month, they gave us the core or the framework of the application. And that's what we used up until we converted it to the the service bus piece.
And that included the smart client and
Yep.
the back-end modeling
Yep.
pieces. So where did you spend the most time out of that whole?
Most time was in the WPF part.
Yeah.
So the rich client part took us the longest simply because we were somewhat new to it, and we knew this other stuff in our sleep. So for us, whether you know this real well or not, the power that you've seen through the demos today, including the 1245 session, is that you can quickly get a back end up here. What does that mean? For us, it means a lot of things. One is you get some of these native form actions that I didn't have to build additional functionality for. So I didn't need to do a web page, or even though I plugged into the WPF app, I didn't need to do that. People have been changing their icons, as you saw from the application here. I'm surprised at how often people change them, but again, it's a usability thing I never would have considered. It was simple for us to have. It's just sitting right here. And as you'll learn with the CRM 5, you're going to get additional enhancements on the CRM 5 side that'll make this even easier for us, so I won't have to worry about URLs, et cetera. Switching back over, we have a concept of feeds. Feed entries is the post that you see. You have a concept of parent feed. That's what formats it for us. Again, looking at the feed entries in this way, you can't make heads or tails out of it. So even though xRM did a nice job of modeling it for us, from a display factor, this is much more engaging. This is much more usable than just looking at a grid list. So again, it's using the right interface for the audience, for the right individuals. And then I'll take a quick look over at the workflows, and you can see how simple this was. Because these are first-class entities within Dynamics CRM, we get workflow created. And from that, I have about the simplest workflow you can see. So when a feed is created that doesn't equal project types, you can use these properties, and you're going to see that we just pre-populate based on dynamic tokens, or I think you're calling dynamic values. We're populating that data in there. So again, if I'm not a heavily social individual, I fill out my proposal. That proposal is going to go through. It's going to be written on behalf of me. I have now contributed to this ecosystem, even though all I'm doing is doing my job. And what we have found as a fallout from that is that people are actually paying more attention to the data they're putting in the system. So even at a company of 50, and we do implementations up to 5,000, I'm always shocked at the challenges we have with our clients I have to take internally as well. And then one of the best ways to do that is surfacing this information out to everyone else. And the key to think about here is that they have access to this information anyway. They can click to the entities. We have dashboards. We have all these pieces in here. But I'm actually finding more adoption by people keeping their little rich client tool up and getting notifications as they pop up for them.
So this looks really good. Where do you think the Azure web roles now start to fit into this?
Excellent question, and perfect lead-in. So again, I wanted multiple ways to get access to this information. One of them is our mobile clients. The best way that we were able to do that is, again, as you'll see in the architecture slide here at the end, we have everything constructed. All we have to do is basically reskin the user interface in a way that's received by these multiple devices. So in our case, this literally took us, I want to say, about 2 days. Most of it was playing with CSS and styling, and we got the functionality out here. What we've learned from this conference, especially with Silverlight 4, is I can actually streamline it even further by writing a Silverlight 4 application, and then I can now basically have a single code base or symmetric code base between these deployment pieces.
Cool.
So I know my team was pretty excited about reskinning the WPF into Silverlight, and then now this becomes just a control on a web page. It's even less work, and we don't have to recreate things like this comments section, et cetera. So now if I pull that up on a Windows mobile device, I can get that. If I'm at a kiosk or a terminal, I can get that application even though I don't have my rich client available to me. And then just to kind of show you that simplicity, I got half my user base is iPhone based. So this is our actual live feed here, and you're getting people making comments. So again, I think we have about 1,600 or 6,000 total posts between 1,700 feeds, or kind of top level. And I think about 300 of those are actually system derived. And we haven't actually built out our full analytics workflow piece from that. And then I guess the last thing I can show here is that, again, for me, if I'm not in the office, I like digest email. So similar as you would expect from other, whether you're getting alerts from, like, let's say, Google or what have you, we get a full listing of the day's topics that were spoken about. And I found it's been a quick way for me to kind of get a feel of what's going on in the organization, both, again, from a business perspective as well as a fun perspective.
Right on.
With that, we'll take a look at the architecture. So very similar to what you saw with Garish. In this case, we have our xRM and workflow and CRM storage as our core platform piece. We actually built a WCF layer on top, and what that's doing is aggregating, both handling the communication for 4, we'll be able to make that even more streamlined in 5 because we'll have a native WCF endpoint to talk to. And this also aggregates the data and formats in a more hierarchical fashion. As you saw, those feeds were listed in a single table. This service basically aggregates that. With CRM5, we actually have an option now. We can just talk directly to the WCF endpoint, and then we can take that aggregation part and put it in an assembly or decide if we want to architect it a little differently. This talks through the service bus here. So from the service bus, our web role's talking, as well as our WPF client. One of the advantages of WCF is that you got a hybrid mode, which means that if I'm internal on my LAN, I will talk directly to the WCF services and to xRM. I don't have to go out, which saves me obviously the time to go out, but also the dollars, since we haven't figured out exactly how much that's going to cost us to continue to use WCF. So when you're on internally, I don't want to be taxing the system if I don't need to. The scheduling piece is the last piece here that I'll get some benefit from 5, but ultimately the reason this is here is it's doing my aggregation. So we have a blog. Every time a new blog post goes up, we actually go up to the blog feed, grab it, and stick it in as a feed. So again, my entire organization is aware of what we're blogging. It's good to have our customers know that and my team not, so we want to make sure they're aware. It also does our emailing, and it also tags our analytics system. So as we're doing utilization numbers, et cetera, it goes out and does all that and just writes them as feeds. What's great about this is that we're doing everything through the CRM4 API. So as you just learned today, I can upgrade to 5 today and not make a single code change. However, there's some benefits of CRM5 that we're going to be taking advantage of, so we expect that we will be making some code adjustments to take advantage of some of those new technologies.
Awesome. Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. All right, so what did we see then? We've seen some amazing things that were coming in CRM5 as part of the xRM application framework. We've seen some patterns that you can start to leverage and pull together Azure and xRM to really build some compelling solutions that can scale very quickly. And you're seeing how you can apply these technologies today in a way that's actually very compelling and very useful. But you're also seeing how, going back to our original sort of opening statement, the solutions that you can build here are not about just simple forms over data. It's really about bringing together sort of the full power of the platform and the technology stack to really solve some very relevant problems. So in terms of just quick summary then, this is really about how you can build full solutions much faster and accelerate your development with xRM, and how you can extend the reach of your solutions with Azure, and that you can actually get started on those things today. So as part of getting started, I will point out 3 things. One is obviously you can start getting going with Dynamics CRM4 now. I'm also very excited to announce that we are actually opening up the CRM5 Metro program for ISVs. So for those of you that are interested, details here on the slide. Basically, this is really targeted towards ISVs and startups, and this is going to give you access to a lot of the early participation in the CRM5 process. And if you got questions or you're interested in following up here, Girish is actually on point for that from our side. And you can also send email to the email address on the screen here. And then finally, the last piece that I would just point out here is that also make a pitch here for the xRM Virtual User Group. So this is actually a user group that's been spun up. So Shan is actually one of the founders there, along with David Yak and Julie Yak, to really drive adoption around xRM and really start to spread the story. So if you're interested in what you've seen here and you want to start getting involved in the conversation, this is a great place to go. One other point I will make is that everything that you see here on the xRM Virtual site is actually running on Azure. So this site right here is actually an Azure hosted site, and all the content that you see on this page is actually coming from a CRM Online instance. So this is another real world example of exactly the patterns that we've just been talking about over the last 45 minutes or so. So with that, I'll give the pitch, although it's the last session of the conference, and we're 5 minutes over, so I won't hold you guys any longer. But I will say thank you. I hope you have had a great conference. I very much appreciate your attendance here today, and I hope you guys have safe travels back to where you're going. With that, thanks a lot.